Hi, it's Dwyer. It's January 24th, 2026. Folks, let's summarize our NFL picks for this weekend. But first, remember, the opinion you should follow should be your own. Just consider this video to be a second opinion from a complete stranger online. Let me also point out, too, that I'm aware of the fact that my subscribers are gamblers, investors. They deal with risk tolerance, risk management. Silver right now has crossed $100 an ounce. Let me repeat that. Silver has crossed $100 an ounce. You might recall me here online talking about silver 4 or 5 years ago in several videos. Now, given the uncertainty in the world, places like Iran, places like Japan, snap elections called, places like Venezuela, where we've dislodged Maduro, given the sluggishness of the digital asset market, how long has Bitcoin been around $90,000 a coin? Right? What exactly is holding back Ethereum after our embrace of stable coins that rely on the Ethereum system? How long's Ethereum going to linger around $3,000 a coin? Now, in that world, silver remains a remarkable investment. Understand, the uncertainty is buoying precious metals, silver and gold. I'm going to list here for purchase some silver coins. Take a look at it. Ask yourself whether silver remains a good investment. It's been a tremendous investment over the last, let's say, 18 months. You need to ask yourself whether the silver case still exists. I think it does. Now let's talk football. I need for people first, in looking at this weekend, to get the timing down on what just happened for these two teams' last games. Seattle played at home. In other words, before that game against the 49ers, the Seahawks didn't have to travel. They were sleeping in their own beds. They were shopping in their own neighborhoods. Everything was peaceful and familiar. Then they go out and they destroy the 49ers. In what quarter of that game did you feel that Seattle knew they were going to win it? Right, folks? I would argue that by the early part of the third quarter, you still had clearly another quarter to play. Seattle knew they had gotten by the 49ers. Again, the final score, Seattle was in the 40s. The Niners had 6 points. Now, just understand, the next day, not that day, the next day, the Rams are in cold weather. They're playing the Bears in Chicago. The crowd was a decidedly Chicago Bear crowd. Right? Ram fans see the temperature drop into the 30s and lower, and they're out the building. Right? Just understand, the Rams were dealing with yet another road game because the week before they were in Carolina on the road. And here are the Rams in Chicago. At what point in that game, late game, right? It ends at night. At what point in that game did the Rams know they had it in the bag? Folks, after 4 grueling quarters, after a heartbreaking end of the fourth quarter from the Ram perspective, right? Caleb running backwards for yards, throws it where? Into the end zone. As the ball's in the air, I'm sure Ram fans thought, there is no way. All we have to do here is knock it down. There's no way that Caleb on his back foot threw a pass that was viable. It was. They scored a touchdown. The game went into overtime. The Rams had to reach into a bag of tricks that they had not reached into the rest of the game. Right, Matthew Stafford had to go to Devontae Adams, who had hardly been used in the game. Look at the box score. Right, so the Rams needed 4 quarters plus part of an overtime to beat the Bears in a game in freezing weather that was played at night, where you knew the Rams weren't going to then run to the airport and leave that night. So folks, understand, the Rams likely didn't leave Chicago until the next day, the second day after the Seattle runaway victory. Right? I believe it's, 35-point victory over the 49ers. So Seattle, the favorite in the game. Right? You're getting 2.5 points or so. Seattle, the team playing at home, has a 2-day advantage over the Rams. Right? The Rams leave Chicago the next day. Seattle won 2 days earlier in a blowout. If you believe these teams are close, and they are, then you have to be leaning towards Seattle taking advantage of its home field advantage. Right? One of the hardest places to play in the league. You can barely hear yourself. You know how they do it in Seattle, too. They're going to have some historical Seahawk, Marshawn Lynch, Cortez Kennedy, someone like that. Sean Alexander come out, ring the bell, or some other Seattle celebrity, Ken Griffey Jr., come out, Felix Rodriguez. Someone's going to come out who epitomizes the spirit of the sports world in Seattle before the game, and the fans are going to be hopped up. Right, folks? They're the 1 seed. It's their house. This is their moment, and they are the much better rested team. Right, let's also talk about the Rams the week before. The Bear game in Chicago. There they were, in a game they were supposed to win in Carolina. They're pressuring Bryce Young. Folks, the Carolina Panthers would not wilt. They're throwing punches. They're fighting back. When was it in that game that the Rams knew they had it in the bag? Folks, again, it's the fourth quarter. It took a perfect throw by Matthew Stafford. Right, so you're looking at a Ram team that's been playing on the road in grueling games that aren't decided until the fourth quarter or overtime. And they don't have the rest that Seattle has. They haven't been in town for weeks, as Seattle has. I like the Seahawks over the Rams. Folks, even the line seems questionable to me. right? Given the fact that the Seahawks have more rest, blew out the Niners, another arch nemesis team of both of these teams. Right? Understand, the Niners were in contention to have the 1 seed late in the season. Right? Given the fact that Seattle's playing that level of football, if the line accurately reflected the trials and tribulations of the Rams the prior 2 games, the fact that the Rams have been traveling and playing in different time zones, right? Carolina, East Coast, Chicago, Midwest. Now the same week as the Chicago game, they're going to play Seattle on the West Coast. Come on. I mean, if the line accurately reflected where the teams are in terms of, the amount of stress they've been under, this line should be over 3. How's it 2.5? Let me say this also, and I mean this, and I know this is not the way the press is seeing it. Sam Darnold, as Jarrett Stidham might end up showing us, is one of these guys whose NFL career didn't take off immediately. It didn't leap off the launching pad, right? It took him a while to get his bearings. Now, there he was on a highly touted Viking team last year, right? I need for folks to think about the mental toughness here. I know the feeling in the press is that Sam Darnold at times sees ghosts, right? But I need for you to look at Justin Jefferson's numbers from last year with Sam Darnold, right, folks? They mirror Jackson Smith and Jigba's numbers this year with Sam Darnold. Right now, you have that Minnesota defense. Didn't they just re-sign Brian Flores? I understand the contract has an out if Flores gets a head coaching position, but wow, that's a team with a great defensive culture in Minnesota. With Sam Darnold, look at the number of wins from last year. The team instead decided to stick with J.J. McCarthy. Talk about a slap in the face after the year Darnold had last year in Minnesota. So Darnold goes to Seattle. What happens? Well, his next game's going to be in the NFC Conference Finals. Right? His wide receiver was the top wide receiver in the National Football League. Right, folks? I suspect that bettors have been suckered into not understanding that some quarterbacks develop more slowly than others. How much sustained excellence from Sam Darnold do you need to realize that this is the guy in the league who has the most wins over the last 2 years? That this guy's had enough sustained success where we need to look at him and think, wow, this guy is one of the better quarterbacks in the league. I think Sam Darnold shows it this game. Let's go one step further. I'll throw in a bonus pick here. You remember when you were sitting down, you personally, and you were handicapping these NFL teams in August. I want you to remember that moment. Right? So you looked at the Rams and you thought, wow, this team looked as good as anyone looked against Philly in last year's playoffs in Philly. Right? Stafford was excellent. You were looking at this team and certain things weren't surprises. Right? You thought, the Rams, they're a playoff team. Right? If I'm looking at who's going to be MVP, I'm thinking, okay, what teams made the playoffs last year? Who were the superstars on those teams? Jalen Hurts, let me consider him. Saquon Barkley, let me consider him. Matthew Stafford, let me consider him. At no time during those considerations did you think, let me look at the 4-win New England Patriots. Let me look at their second-year quarterback, Drake May. Right, folks? You know, there's a school of thought. I know economist Nassim Taleb believes this. If you want to figure out who's doing best in the room, look at the guy who you can't understand how he got in the room. Right, folks? When you look at Drake May's numbers, completion percentage around 70%, a lot of passing yards. Where's his team playing? In the AFC Conference Championship game. Right? A lot of people are thinking, whoa, AFC East, I had that penciled in for the Bills. I didn't have that penciled in for New England. What are they doing here? MVP discussion. When did you start thinking about Drake May as being part of it? Now, folks, okay, let's look at Davante Adams. Drake May has a big weapon, highly thought of weapon, Stephon Diggs. Right? Okay, you're looking at the weapons the guys have. You say, okay, well, you know, Drake May has Stephon Diggs just like Matthew Stafford has Davante Adams. Matthew Stafford also has Puka Nacua. Who's the Patriot you think is commensurate with Puka Nacua? If the answer is no one, if you think Drake May has done what he's done with less than Matthew Stafford, folks, the MVP race decides itself. And I hope you have money on both, right? I hope you got a futures. I hope around week 6 or 7, you thought to yourself, let me take advantage of these odds. But if you don't, and you're trying to pick the MVP right now, folks, I'm leaning Drake May. Right? Just food for thought. Okay, let's look at the AFC. Let me just say this. You always want to figure out who the offensive coaches are in love with. Right? The players who the offensive coaches, the guys whose backgrounds are offensive, the guys who played and were offensive players. You always want to figure out who those guys are, right? So New England, the Patriots, have an offensive coordinator. He was Tom Brady's offensive coordinator. This guy has had success as an offensive coordinator in the postseason. He got a job years ago. Josh McDaniels was named the head coach of the Raiders. You understood that he had a lot of power. One of the first personnel moves he did, one of the first, was he went out and got the backup quarterback, Tom Brady's backup, for the New England Patriots to join him with the Raiders. That backup quarterback was Jarrett Stidham, the guy who's going to be starting for the Denver Broncos in the upcoming game. Right, folks? Just understand Stidham, late 20s, right? Baylor's former quarterback, was MVP of a bowl game, has been on Sean Payton's, another offensive guy, right? Former offensive coordinator for the New York Giants, Drew Brees' head coach. Understand, Jarrett Stidham, of all the guys in the world, has been the chief backup quarterback for the Denver Broncos for years, multiple years, under Sean Payton. Now, when your fan club includes Josh McDaniels and Sean Payton, folks, you're doing something right as an offensive player. Now, the bets I like, because we're hunting for big game here. You know, I'm not enamored in trying to get a minus 110 or a minus 105, even a plus 100. Doesn't really float my boat. Now, the line was out of whack earlier in the week, right? You were actually getting 5.5 points at home with the Broncos. I want people to think about the possibility that while Bo Nix is clearly the better runner than Jarrett Stidham, understand when Jarrett Stidham became the starter for the Raiders late in the 2022 season, he had a game where he threw for 365 passing yards, 3 TDs, 2 picks. Right? The picks matter. But again, this is years ago. Right? Josh McDaniels saw enough of him. He was the backup to Derek Carr, where McDaniel actually gave him the keys to the car. And he delivered with 365 passing yards. In other words, the offense wasn't handed off to the running back running behind the fullback. No. The offense was, hey, Jarrett, throw the ball all over the field. And he did. 365 passing yards, 3 TDs, 2 picks. Right, so when the line was off, the bet I made that I recommended here online was to take the alt line, 7.5 points. I thought, wow, the 5.5 or 5 at the time, that was generous. But I wanted the hook. It's a backup quarterback. I wanted a little insurance. I didn't want the game to end with Denver losing by 7 and I lose because I only got 5 or 5.5. So I said, take the 7.5 on an alt line. You're getting that right now at a minus 185 or so. Right? Well, on the futures market, at the time you were getting the Denver Broncos, who are 1 home win away from winning the AFC. You were getting them at 13-1. Even now, they're up around 10-1, 11-1. Right, folks? You know the signature of this team is its pass rush. You understand you have a defense in Denver. Right? You also understand that on a futures this late in the season, right, even the teams that win are only going to play 1 game after this one. Right? You understand that if you go into the Super Bowl with 13-1 leverage, you could easily hedge the play. You could easily make a profit, especially since public perception is going to change greatly between now and the Super Bowl if Jarrett Stidham shows up and let's say he passes for 365 yards and 3 TDs. Right? It's unlikely that even if Seattle comes out and levels the Rams, that Seattle's going to be more than a minus 200 in the Super Bowl on a money line. Right? So it's easy if you're getting double-digit leverage, right? Leverage of 10-1 and higher. It's easy to hedge the play in the Super Bowl where you would net a profit if either team wins. So for that reason, the minute the casino says, hey, we'll give you 13-1 or even 10-1 on the futures, on the Broncos, to win it all, I believe your response should be, I'll take it, thank you. Right? I like the Broncos here on a future I think they're underpriced in the game. I think Stidham is underpriced. I think people are overvaluing Bo Nix. I can't say here that Bo Nix is a better passer than Stidham. Right? I'll agree. Stidham hasn't played in a game for a long time. But folks, he's been in the Sean Payton system for multiple years. Right? So, to sum up, I like Seattle to win and be in the Super Bowl. Right? Win today and be in the Super Bowl. Understand the Super Bowl is going to be in an NFC Western stadium. Levi. Bus ride away from here, ironically. In the AFC, I like on the 7.5 alt line. Right? And I would pay more than a minus 185 for that. To me, the value of the hook is that important. I like the home team, the Denver Broncos. Right? And on futures, I like Denver with the idea that if Denver wins the game, I'm going to hedge it. And when it comes to the MVP, folks, any guy who turns a 4-win team into a team that makes it to the conference finals, and I understand the vote has already taken place, right? But just understand at the end of the season, you had an anomaly. You had some team other than the Buffalo Bills win the AFC East. And they did it with a second-year quarterback who arguably didn't have the offensive resources around him that Matthew Stafford had. Right? And understand, Drake May throws deep. Look at the yardage. I believe Stafford won the passing yardage crown. But just understand, without Puka Nacua, Drake May was up around 70% completion with a lot of passing yards. There was a stretch there where he was leading the NFL in passing yards. Right? I'm positive, I believe, that a lot of people who vote for MVP were looking at the numbers in November, early December, and they were grudgingly reaching the conclusion that the player who meant the most to his team this year was Drake May. I'm leaning Drake May in the MVP race. Those are my thoughts. Let me hear yours. Let me wish everyone good luck. We'll be here after the games with our reaction to what happened. Thanks for stopping by. I look forward to your comments in the comment section of this YouTube video. And please, take a look at the silver offerings that we're offering, as well as the quality of the merchants we're presenting. Thanks for stopping by.